welcome once again to another edition of the You Should Get a License podcast edition. Today we have with us someone who has really, worked at all levels, of the insurance industry. Over 40 years, his career has spanned from, being an account executive, an account manager, developing urban markets across different territories. He's been an instructor, for licensing. Uh, he's a board member of the Virginia Insurance Agents Association. He's been a president for the DC chapter for NAIA, the National African American Insurance Association, an esteemed individual, a great human being, family man. When they say the salt of the earth, I think that describes this gentleman, and that's just not my opinion, but everyone who speaks about him, and that is Mr. William Bill Allen. Mr. Allen, pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure to be a part of this conversation. You have the distinction to have me on my first podcast, so I'm a little excited about having the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
We got an exclusive, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely. And when you see the video version of this on our YouTube channel, you'll see that he's very well lit. It's a beautiful background. Just a perfect visual as well. So don't forget to check out the video version once you listen to the audio as well. Mr. Allen, I really want to get started because this is, you should get a license and really encouraging individuals to explore careers in the insurance industry. I want to ask you, about your segment, because we talk about the different areas of insurance, and our guests previous to yourself have been in that life and health space, but you're the first guest that we've had that's coming from the P&C world, the property and casualty world. So could you tell us a little bit about your segment of the business and what you did in the insurance space, in the insurance industry?
Okay. Well, my first introduction to the insurance industry was right after a little while after college. I came into the business working. Can I mention the company's name that I worked for?
Sure.
Okay. I worked for the Travelers Insurance Company, and I started my career there in the New Orleans area. Started in the underwriting, which was automobile and homeowners, which was all new to me. But as an underwriter, I had the authority to obviously approve applications for car insurance, homeowner insurance, fire insurance, and at the same time, visit with those agents that represented the company. The Travelers is a company that offers a contract to individual business owners. They call them the independent agent. So that's part of the independent agency system, where an agent can represent multiple companies. Travelers is probably one of 3 agents companies, or could be one of 40 companies in an agency. So my role was to work with those agents and increase the Travelers' business opportunities within that agency, meaning how many customers can you send to me on a weekly or monthly basis? How many applications can I get from you? That was my charge, and my charge with those agents to get them to sell the Travelers insurance. So as an account manager, that was my role. That role evolved into more of an agency appointment position. So not only could I work with existing agents, I could actually go out and look for new agents. So one of the first opportunities I had in New Orleans was to actually give an opportunity to an African-American business owner in the New Orleans area who represented other companies, but did not represent the Travelers. So that was sort of the Travelers' introduction into expanding its foothold in the African-American community. There were probably, and I can recall, at least 1, 2, or maybe 3 minority agents in that area that began to represent the Travelers as a part of my involvement. So, and I really enjoyed doing that. That was sort of like, oh, I can go out and look for people who look like me and provide them with an opportunity with a really good standard, A+ rated, and good company. And that was one of the things that we look for, is when we look for agents, let them know that Travelers is a superior rated, A-rated, Standards and Poor, AM Best, and these types of companies really give a lot of credence to customers who want to buy insurance. So that was my first introduction, was in the Travelers office. And I could go on with so many different.
Actually, I actually kind of want to stay, in that space for a minute, because, you were saying that really for Black, this is the thing that I don't think many people understand when they think about insurance careers and the opportunities that are prevalent. There was a time, not too long ago, where it was few and far between to see a Black insurance agent.
Exactly.
Right. But particularly one that had, let alone have its own agency, right? One that had reached, that level of success. And what we have now is really a privilege where everyone has the opportunity, to get into the space with a very low barrier to entry. What was the climate like then, even if there was any challenges, even trying to convince an organization like Travelers to say, hey, look, there's viability here with these agents? Or did you have any challenges there?
Okay, that's a very good question. Let me kind of start by saying my road started in 1973. So when you look at 1973 and you look at the passage of the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act, it's a very small amount of time. So companies were interested in what we now call diversity. They were interested in doing that. But people who worked for them had no clue as to where to go, and didn't want to go, and in some cases, didn't feel comfortable going. So that made it, that was a sort of a problem for agents who existed in that arena, that there were some companies who employed people who didn't want to go in the Black community or any ethnic community. Then you had the problem of underwriting. The companies learned later on, and redlining was not uncommon. If you've not heard the term, redlining was used by a lot of companies, big or small, to avoid writing business that they considered either older dwellings in urban areas, or people who live in urban areas that own cars and travel in and out of those communities. So redlining was very prevalent. It was almost acceptable for companies to during that time to do that. And it presented challenges for those of us who were coming into the arena to not only find an agent, but then have that agent have the ability to write certain types of business. And the underwriting precluded that, especially when it came to older homes, homes that may not have been updated. And in the urban areas, people were living in homes that were been built back in the early 50s and sometimes the early 40s that may not have been up to code. So these were homes that some Black people or people of color were living in. Wow. So it presented a challenge back then.
So on one hand, you have communities, right, that are deemed, uninsurable, right? But then you have the individuals that work to service those communities, unable to insure them at all, but can't really go into other communities to build their business either. So exactly, you're kind of in a professional limbo.
Right. Now, not to say that in 1973, you had families that were developing a middle class sort of lifestyle.
Right.
So, but then you had some people who were making middle class monies, but lived in older parts of a city or a particular community, and they would suffer because they were paying higher price or not getting a homeowner's policy, but may get a fire policy. So they were getting different products. So if you judge the man based on his income as opposed to where he lived, then that person who was doing well may have lived in an older home, could have been a family home, but couldn't insure it in a standard company.
Wow.
So there was a lot of things happening. Even in the 1973, kids were coming in, we were coming out of college. There were people already out of college who were living who had reasonably good jobs in the New Orleans area that I know of, that were, depending on the economic climate for African Americans during that time, they were making some pretty good money. Yes. And lives were changing.
Okay. Yeah. So at that time, there was a progression or progressiveness that was happening in the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a space for those agents, and obviously, the middle class was growing in that time, particularly the Black middle class, growing in that time, which started to create even more and more segments of market space for those agents in those areas. And it seems that that's pretty similar to some of the things that we talk about today with gentrification.
Yes.
And basically, I guess if you have a situation where those property values are difficult to insure, then the property values can go down. People can either lose it, maybe move out, or others can come in, purchase it at a less price.
Yeah.
Drive it up, then it becomes insurable again.
Exactly. So what you have there, back then you had what was called territorial rating. Zip codes were not a factor back then in the whole identifying where people lived. And that was a postal kind of thing. So you have to just like all kinds of different techniques, things that were happening in various arenas, like products. An insurance company would develop a product for the urban area. It was just basic fire, or a dwelling fire policy, or dwelling fire policy 3. There's like 3 different types of fire policies: basic, a broad, and a special. And those policies had very limited coverage. They only covered maybe 5 or 6 perils: windstorm, fire, lightning, those kinds of common kinds of perils. Then you had a homeowner policy that was a basic, broad, and special form that had multiple perils that they insured. For each policy you purchase perils that cover certain types of losses. So a person who lived in an urban area wasn't buying a homeowners. They were getting a basic fire that had limited coverage and sometimes no liability. So it's a very different product in those areas.
That's tough.
So, and the cost was much more. Although you got limited perils, the pricing was still, higher than a regular homeowners. That's just how it was done back then.
Wow.
Now, over time, all that evolved to where we can buy a homeowner policy in an urban area.
Right.
And you only use a dwelling fire policy if you absolutely have to. And that's the only thing that exists. The policy still exists, but it's used very infrequently, but it's used primarily for investors who buy properties that they own, but they may rent to others, or it may be a property that is older. It meets standard codes, but could be a small home, small frame house. They can still sell a fire policy too. And now it kind of depends on the client has more of an opportunity to choose than they used to.
Yeah, because if they're an investor, then they can get that, and the renter can get the renter's policy for their personal property. And
yeah, but it covered the home for the investor.
Right. Got you. Yeah. So with that, and really, I mean, Mr. Allen, I feel like that portion of the conversation we probably could talk about for an hour, right? but just to stay in line with the theme of this podcast,
Yeah.
let's talk.
But that's more of a historical analogy
Yes.
of how the industry kind of moved and evolved and what took place to make that happen. That's sort of the beginning of another story, is what companies did to make insurance more inclusive. What triggered that? And there was a lot of things happening in a lot of cities around the country. You're in New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Richmond, Washington, D.C., Dallas, Houston, where there was a high population of African Americans or people of color, let's say. There were things happening in the background to spur companies to take a more serious look at writing coverage in urban areas. So they were being sued.
Mm.
And companies were being sued for millions of dollars.
Man, and it's like, why do people have to be forced to do the right thing?
That's always been our story.
Right.
And it continues to this day. When you think
of
of things that happen, look at what's happening in the political arena to this day.
Like I said, we could continue into. We could just keep going, on this conversation, but
seems like it.
I get it. No, but